Good evening, everyone. Well, I'm here to have a fun evening. How about the rest of you? And I am so thrilled by the turnout, by the attendance. That really encourages the Historical Society. It really does. I'm Barbara Watson, and I am the long-time member and the long-time president of the Historical Society. So if we have anyone here tonight that would ever be interested in being president, talk to me after this is over. But I have a wonderful board, I really do, to work with. And I hope everyone got a program for tonight that will help you remember some dates and things that we want you to remember of opportunities that are coming up. Does everyone have a program? Very good. And I've been asked by Bill Tate, who is so kind to come tonight and take the program for us. Please turn off your cell phones. Don't put them on vibrate. They've got to be off because it really messes up his taping if we don't do it. So we want the broadcast to turn out well, don't we? So we'll give everybody a minute to do that. Our membership, and Miss Linda Campbell takes care of our membership, and I think we are still 70 strong. Is that right, Linda? And that we're just very encouraged by that too. Good job sending in your memberships and everything. I wanted to tell you, in your newsletter, you read that we were going up to the Patterson School to take a tour. And did we ever have a tour? We had the best time. There were 7 of us. I know there were some conflicts and things that day that some couldn't go. But we went up there and toured a lot of the buildings. I did not know there was so much going on up there. I encourage you to go, when you can this summer to go up there. We visited a lot of the different buildings. Some of them are under restoration right now. I am a retired school librarian, so when I saw their library up there, I was just hyperventilating. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful library. Janet Spoon has just done a fantastic job up there. So it's worth going, it really is. Then Liza Plaster and Janet Spoon were our hostesses for the day, and we had lunch on the veranda. We took our Jean, you were with us. We took our lunch with us, and there was a nice breeze blowing up there, and the mountains in the distance, and we didn't want to go home. We just wanted to stay. So that's what. And actually, we also, with your permission, I'm sure, we took them a $100 donation for the foundation up there. We have 2 new board members. We have some vacancies. And so Cindy Day, Jeff Stepp had been on our Historical Society board, and also he was our director, as you know. And so Cindy Day is our interim director here, and she kindly agreed to step into Jeff's place because we certainly want to keep a liaison going all the time between the museum and the Historical Society. And Richard Gardner has kindly agreed to be on our board. And Richard, probably a lot of people already know you, but we call him the Star Man. He takes care of the Star and Cross Man. He takes care of High Brighton Mountain, and he did a wonderful program for us. And the Historical Society also tries to support that project every year. And I wanted to talk to you something I added in here. Every week, Bethel Colony comes up and helps us up here. They set the tables up for you, the chairs up for you today. They do our mowing, heavy lifting, rearranging, and always the nicest 2 men that come. And every year, the Historical Society does a Christmas project. And it isn't necessarily a historical project. It's a community project. So I just was thinking about them for the last couple of weeks. And they do a Bible study out there. And so when they do their Bible studies, they need notebooks, and they need pens, and they need pencils. And so I asked the 2 men today, I said, would you like for us as a Christmas project to supply those for you? And they said, oh, that would be wonderful, because they said they were up to 100 men out there. And I said, well, what kind do you use? And he said they just use the regular spiral-bound composition books. So if y'all will start collecting those, and you can turn them in up here, in packs of pens or pencils, and then hopefully by Christmas we'll have 100 for them.
College rule.
College rule, thank you, Bill. Yes, it needs to be college rule, the wider ruled. But they seem to be real excited that we were thinking about doing that. And you know, you think about if Bethel Colony had to buy 100 composition books, that's a lot of money. So we can do that. So we'll do that for them. All right, you'll see on your program, a lot of people have been asking since our beloved Jeff Stepp passed away about a tribute being done for him, and we felt like that it would be best to wait for his daughter to lead out with that, and we miss him terribly. I just count it a privilege to have been able to work with him. All of us that worked with him, he was just a special person. But they are going to do a tribute at Fort Defiance on August the 5th, and that will be done by the 26th reenactors. So it will be a Civil War reenactors, and I'm sure it's going to be very impressive. And the daughter, Deborah Elmore, she's helping out with the planning of this thing. And it's from 11 to 1, but we've been advised you probably need to come earlier by 10 or so because they do expect a big turnout. When word gets out, there are going to be people probably here from even other states. Jeff was well known in a lot of different states and areas and all. So that's the tribute that's going to be. And the museum that will be closed. It's on Saturday, and the museum will be closed for that. Yes. All right. How many of you have ever seen Nora Brooks portray any of the historical characters? Well, we've just adopted her. I don't care how often I see her do somebody. It's always good, it's always impressive, and she's just one of a kind. So she's coming back for a return engagement here at the museum on October the 14th. That's on a Saturday night. It will be at 7 o'clock, and she will be doing Robert E. Lee's daughter, Mildred Child Lee. And if you've seen her before, she comes in this wonderful antebellum costume with the hoop skirts and all that. But please encourage people to come, because she's just, if you see her one time, you certainly want to come and see her again. The tickets will be $10, and that will be a fundraiser sponsored by the Historical Society for the museum. All right, any other thing before we introduce our speakers for tonight? We've got a very good program lined up, and as you will see on your program, you have a summary of what our program is going to be about, and the ladies are well able to explain their topic without me going into, and also this was included in your newsletter, so maybe that's the reason so many people came. So see, girls, we already know there's a big interest in your program, so they're going to be very attentive. Restrooms, you always have to say this, restrooms are here and down the hall. So thank you very much for coming tonight.
Good evening. Good evening. The story you are about to hear is true. As Donald M. Goldstein, one of the foremost world experts on World War II, said when he introduced me down in Florida a few months ago, he said, "Folks, this is the real deal. This is not a Spielberg hyped up, made for the movies show. This is the real deal." And every time I give this presentation, I am truly amazed, because I know it's true, but I still feel excited and surprised about the whole thing. I call it when patriotism was the norm, because goodness knows if there was a time when we need patriotism, it is today. In 1998, is that right? Yeah. Tom Brokaw, who most of you know is a national news commentator, he wrote a book he called The Greatest Generation, and it was about the people that grew up during the Depression, went on to fight World War II, but it also included the people who were on the home front, who made a decisive decision to support the war effort. And of course, that moniker now, most people at least, when you hear the word the greatest generation, we automatically think of World War II and the people there. This was a time when patriotism was the highest. You had Hitler marching through Europe, threatening our East Coast, and of course we had the attack on Pearl Harbor, which threw us into the war. And I like to tell the younger folk that perhaps the closest we had become emotionally in this country to what it must have felt like back in World War II was what happened when the Twin Towers came down. We were shocked, we were horrified, we were upset, and then we got angry. And just as in World War I and World War II, when many young men changed their plans and joined the military, of course during World War II, they were drafted, but just as at that time when many young men, and we all know the stories of the 17-year-olds who lied about their age to go fight, we also had, you may not know, that following the Twin Towers that came down, many young men changed their college plans, changed their work plans, and joined the military to defend our country. When we think of how history records war, and rightly so, we learn about the causes, we learn about the battles fought, the victories won, and the treaties signed, but very seldom do we ever talk about what was going on at the home front. Now we know very little comparatively about Civil War. Most of it is what you see in novels where the women would dress up in their fancy clothes and ride their buggies out to the battlegrounds and watch the battles. But we don't know a whole lot more. I shouldn't really say that because I'm not an expert on the Civil War, but typically you don't hear a lot about it, and nor do you hear a lot about what was going on during World War I. But during World War II, we have a lot of information, and no one has confirmed this or told me I was crazy, but I think it had a lot to do with this little Brownie camera. Because by World War II, the Brownie camera had reached a point where it was cheap enough that most local folks could afford it, and everybody had them, and everybody took photographs. So we have countless photographs, and photographs are being discovered on a daily basis as people go through their great-grandparents' attics and their grandparents' attics, and they're finding these treasures in these boxes of photographs. And I'll talk a little bit about Ruth a lot later, but I called this Finding the Spirit of South High. And you probably wonder what on earth why should you care about a high school in Grand Rapids, Michigan and what they did for the war? Well, it's because this story is symbolic of what was going on throughout the nation during World War II and the patriotism that permeated everything. And as you will discover later as Gretchen speaks, there's a tremendous local connection too. Well, war is expensive and somebody has to pay for it. And the major way, over and above taxes, 57% of the cost, close to $3 billion cost of World War II was paid for by Americans buying war bonds and war stamps. And the U.S. Treasury got very smart. They put a tangible face on any bond or stamp that you bought. So they would say, okay, if you could buy raincoats, you could buy bridges, you could buy Jeeps, you could buy all kinds of military equipment. They even told the children in their weekly reader, they had these little, we call them fillers now, or little subliminals that said, if you buy one 25-cent stamp, you can feed a carrier pigeon for a day. And of course, most of you know that carrier pigeons played a major role during World War II in bringing the orders to and from the front. So even the children were targeted a lot. They also said for a 10-cent stamp, you can buy 3 cartridges for your father's gun. Now, you wouldn't see that in today's literature to children in school, but that was a very, very common thing. So they had all of these campaigns to encourage people to make you feel like if I buy, fill a book of stamps and make this investment in my country, you also felt like you were actually physically contributing equipment for your loved one who is serving in the military. The largest of this program was called the WWII Bomber program. And by the way, this world expert who I was talking about also did a little research before my presentation and shocked me with a statement that he was unable to find any other book written about this program. So this might be the only place you ever hear about this, at least for now. But the largest of this program was the WWII Bomber program. And basically what it said was, if you could show proof that you raised $75,000, initiated bond sales of $75,000, you could buy a pursuit fighter. But if you could show proof that you raised $300,000 or up to $375,000, and it was interesting, that price kept changing. I saw it everywhere from $249,000 to $375,000. If you could show proof that you initiated those sales, you could buy a B-17 or a B-24. But not only could you buy it, but in the beginning, when the campaigns first started, if you show proof that you could do this, you could name it, they would paint it on the fuselage of the bomber, and they would fly it into your hometown for a dedication ceremony. Well, if you can imagine sitting in Mr. Miller's 8th grade civics class, and Mr. Miller reads out of the Weekly Reader, which most of you will remember, reading this story about the WWII Bomber program. And if you could imagine sitting there, and if you could imagine, ladies, being a young boy, because it was a young boy, Arthur Blackport, very shy. He told me that he was very shy. He never raised his hand in class. But when Mr. Mulder read about the WWII Bomber program, his hand shot up. And he said, Mr. Mulder, why don't we do that? Well, that started the whole ball game rolling. Mr. Mulder thought it was a great idea. He sent him and his friend Mel down to Mr. Coryell's office, the principal, and they had a discussion, and the campaign was born. However, these were eighth graders. These 2 boys were 13 years old. And the principal and Mr. Mulder got together and said, whoa, they're 13-year-olds. If we're going to show proof and raise $75,000, we can't put that amount of money and that amount of responsibility on 8th graders. We need some help. So they went to the senior council, and 2 juniors stepped forward, David Dutcher and Grace Moyer. Arthur Blackport was a 13-year-old who raised his hand. And Dave Dutcher and Grace Moyer stepped forward, and they initiated the campaign. So now we have a campaign. They get together and they decide that they're going to try to buy the pursuit fighter. This was mid-December 1942. They figured that by April 1st, 1943, they ought to be doing pretty darn well if they could show proof that they had raised $75,000. So they had a big assembly. Of course, somebody painted the bomber. That was a big poster. They rolled it out onto the assembly floor, and they had this big assembly, and they got everybody all excited, and the campaign began. Well, the money started to roll in. Now, I have to go back a little bit, because when I knew bits and pieces of this story because I attended South High School, but I didn't know the particulars. And when I heard them talk about $75,000, surely this money did not walk through the doors of that high school. Well, the stamp money did. Many of you remember buying U.S. stamps in your school when you were going through school. I know we bought them when I went through, not for the war. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Thank you very much. Anyways, the bond money, the bonds were sold at the bank. So they had to get the bank, the local bank that was right near the high school, they had to get the bank on board to say, will you support this? And if somebody comes in, would you keep a list of what they're buying if they say they want to give credit to the South High School Buy a Bomber campaign? And first one bank jumped on board, and as the word spread, we ended up with 4 banks that jumped on board that actually then would record the amounts of money when it came in. So they started this campaign mid-December 1942. Well, about 3.5 weeks into the campaign, the money started rolling in. The kids were excited. They were buying stamps. They were giving up their allowance. They were talking to their neighbors. They were, the money started rolling in. And about 3.5 weeks in, it started to go, people started to get tired of it. So the school treasurer went to the kids and went to the principal and said, we need another assembly. So he went to the kids and said, okay, kids, here's the deal. If you want to make our goal by April 1st, that's $75,000, you have got to bring in a minimum of $6,000 a week. Show proof of $6,000 a week if we're going to make this goal by April 1st. And this was mid-January. And so that must have really charged the kids up because 2 weeks later, they had showed proof in 2 weeks' time that they had initiated sales of $75,000 and their goal was achieved. And as you can see, I've done the equivalent of what $75,000 in 1943 looks like today. It's $1,061,943.64. That was of last night. That amount changes. But I always laugh and say, if your grandchildren, I know if my grandchildren called and said, Grandma, guess what? We're going to raise $75,000 and buy a bomber. I'd say, I don't think so. but these kids did it. So, well, now they did this in about 5.5 weeks' time. 5.5 weeks' time, they did this. So their kids, they still had 7-8 weeks to go to meet their goal. So what do you think they thought? Wow, if we can do this in 5.5 weeks, we ought to be able to get the $300,000 more to get our B-17 bomber. So they had another assembly. They kept the first poster as incentive. Look, we did this, now we're going to do this. And if you know anything about a B-17 bomber, that is not a bomber that they painted, but that's okay. We'll give it to them. By the way, Arthur Blackford, the young man who initiated the whole campaign, is the one high on the ladder. And Grace Moyer is the young gal holding the poster on the bottom. At any rate, so their new goal was set on February 14th, and to everyone's shock, 2 weeks later, February 26th, 2 weeks later, they had showed proof that they had initiated an additional $300,000 in sales, and they had their bomber. They had their B-17 bomber, and as you can see, $300,000 today is equivalent to $4,247,774.57. So on April 6th, the Spirit of South High, which is what they called, they named it. This is a replica of it. However, it was painted down here, as you'll see in some of the pictures, not up here, but again, that's okay. This was a gift to me, and I cherish it. It was called the Spirit of South High on April 6, 1943. It was flown into Grand Rapids. Of course, they had a huge dedication ceremony. The governor was there, the mayor was there, all the, any politician that wanted their face in the news, they were there. The commander of, the general in charge of the entire military was not able to attend, but he did send a commendation, a telegram commending the students for their accomplishments. And they had the huge ceremony. The kids, actually marched in a parade from the high school to the Kent County Airport, which was a total of 1.7 miles. And nobody complained that it was too far to walk. But they marched, and all the elementary schools were allowed to participate. All the feeder schools were allowed to participate. Any of the children that had participated in the actual campaign were a part of this. And of course, I don't have a picture on this slide, but as I always laugh and say, you can't, in high school, you don't do anything without a queen, and of course, there was the Bomber Queen. She was there too. And so they had this huge, wonderful, wonderful ceremony. They had a Gold Star section with, all of you know, the Gold Star families were families that had lost someone in the war. There was a section for them to sit. They brought a young man, was on the plane from Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio, which is where the bomber came from, and he was brought back and surprised his wife. She didn't know he was going to be on the plane, and he was given leave to spend a couple days with his family. So they did a whole lot of unique little touches to this wonderful, wonderful ceremony. And then the bomber flew off. It flew off with all of the hopes and dreams that, doggone it, this bomber is going to save the war. This bomber is going to fight the battles and be the one that brings our men home. And you're going to have to wait to find out if that's what the bomber did. I'm going to introduce Gretchen, who's going to interject a more local perspective on this story.
Hi. I'm not from Lenoir, but I wasn't that old either, so it doesn't matter because I didn't know these people. But I'm going to tell you about Lenoir's part, and not only Lenoir, but Caldwell County, because it wasn't just Lenoir, it wasn't just Grand Rapids, it wasn't just Caldwell County, it was the nation together. In fact, in 1942, the school system in North Carolina required, didn't just suggest, schools at war program. And they started, they had all these different programs, and one of the first ones was the Triple Threat Jeep program, where you worked to buy a Jeep, and North Carolina's quota was 248 Jeeps. Well, if you think 100 counties in North Carolina, that's 2 or 3 each, you know? So we'll see. But then they pushed each local school to do things, and they said, oh, your children can volunteer for the Red Cross. They can babysit after school for the younger children while their mothers are working, because the mothers started going back to replace the husbands, remember? They could be air raid spotters, and they could help buy bonds. They could sell the bonds. Same thing as Sandra's. In fact, here's an advertisement I found in the Lenoir News Topic that advertised that the U.S. bonds and stamps for sale where all the stores in Lenoir. Booths will be erected and patriotically decorated, windows appropriately trimmed, and here's the best part, beautiful Lenoir girls, gorgeously costumed, will be in attendance. Flags will be flying, and all of Lenoir, men, women, and children, will buy shares in America. Why? That the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Wow. They heard this every day. Every day they heard this. They saw it in the newspaper, they heard it at work, the children heard it at school. It was the way life was back then, right? So, one of the campaigns was a Triple Threat Jeep. Another one was the Minuteman campaign. Well, I first heard about it when I read Sandra's book, because Sandra's school participated in it too. Here it is. Lenoir students pledged to buy stamps and bonds, and they found out, they found out if they, if 90% of the students in the school agreed to buy stamps or bonds. See, you had so many stamps that equaled a bond, you know. And then each student must agree to buy it every month. And if 90% of them did this, then they earned what's called the Minuteman flag. And Lenoir had 94% participation in the school. Now, she happens to have a Minuteman flag that somebody sent to her. This is what it looked like. And if you'll notice, it's got the 10%. Tell what the 10% stood for.
President Roosevelt asked every American to give 10% of their wages every week, or whatever they were paid, for the war effort. And this was a part of that flag. And when you gave 90% within a month, you won the right to fly this flag for a month over your school or your business or your church. This was open to organizations, churches, cities and counties, and schools were just among the many that participated.
Yeah.
But this is an actual flag.
Okay, so that had that program. Well, it wasn't just Lenoir, and since I live in Gamel, I thought I'm going to start with Gamel. Gamel had auctions to buy the bonds. The school, this is the school system. These are the school's participations. On September 1942, there was the first auction, and a guy by the name of Rodney Hamby, does anybody know him, remember him? I don't know him. He was a ninth grader in 1942, and he was the auctioneer. Look at what they auctioned. The smallest thing was a box of matches that went for $3 to a pound of coffee, which of course coffee back then, people would pay $15 for it because it was rationed. Jar of blackberries, pickles, sugar bowl. In October, by then, it was a puppy, a live chicken, old-fashioned lamps, and a water cooler. And look how much they earned. This is little old Gamel, and it wasn't for themselves. They weren't raising money for their athletics. They were raising money for America to buy bonds. Okay, every school had what's called the Victory. Not every school, but the Victory Corps was the way that they organized. And Collegeville School had its Victory Corps. The president, Claude Caldwell, vice president, Hazel Anderson, Brimo Moore, and then the representatives from each homeroom. This is the high school part of Collegeville. The purpose of the Victory Corps was to train the students, first of all, because they would eventually go into military service, the boys would, and then also to be the leaders of their school during the participations of anything that had the war front kind of things. So this is Collegeville's. Lenoir High School also had the Victory Corps, and in 1942 to 1943, these were the officers: Esther Cresson, John C. Wood, Floyd Blackwell, Joe Howard. Do you recognize names here? And then the homeroom representatives, they were the ones, and these were the people who were the organizers. But everybody, 94% participated, okay? You want me to read the names? You can see. Did you want me to read the names? Catherine Jones, John Childers, Wilma McGalliard, Mary Frances Smith, Elizabeth Haas, Wanda Thompson, Eugene Rector, Betty Weaver, Charles Dobbins, Phyllis Early, Paula Ruth Abernathy, Billy Smith, Billy Strickland, Betty Horton, Jenny Ball, and Willis Haymaker. Recognize names? Mm-hmm.
I think Willis Haymaker was the kind of director for Billy Graham.
Oh, really?
He was
From
his
Lenoir.
traveling business manager for Billy Graham Crusade.
Got his start being patriotic for others. All right, for instance, wrote his school, which was spelled different ways, but anyway, I guessed at the spelling. They won the contest for the most scrap metal collected. They collected $1,013 worth of scrap metal, and second place was Central High School, and this is where I learned that Central High and Lenoir High are the same thing. I'm not from around here, so I didn't realize that, but was at 420. So that was Roadhiss's part, which is really good. Granite Falls, the Granite Falls students, had their auctioneer, Frank Yount, and they collected $475. And the first auction was a climax to the Thrift Week. Now, nationwide, there was a Thrift Week where everybody donated what they would have spent on other things. They collected enough money, this is Granite Falls, to purchase a Jeep. Oak Hill, did it say 4? Oh, 4 Jeeps. 4, I read it wrong. 4 Jeeps. Yeah. At $900 a Jeep. So, all right, Oak Hill School. I thought it was delightful of Oak Hill. The seniors, instead of having, they didn't have proms, they had banquets. And instead of having their banquet that year, they donated the money to do the bond. And they were given, the winners of the homeroom that gave the most, they were given a half-day holiday. Would you bring that? Just their opening day, 1896. That's how much money they collected. Can you imagine? Okay, so North Carolina decided we're going to up it a little bit. This is still 1942. North Carolina decided they were going to have a contest of scrapbook contest, and it would show all the schools and what they had done for the war effort. So it was sponsored by the savings staff of the U.S. Treasury Department. It was local competition, and the winner of, like Caldwell County and Lenoir, would go to Raleigh, and the winner of the ones from all the systems in North Carolina would go, that one winner would go to Washington, D.C. So, now I don't know whether Lenoir, because back then it was 2 separate systems, I don't know whether they had a separate winner or not, but let me show you who won. Who do you think won? Ready? Collettsville. So, they had the best notebook, and they told all the different things that they had done, and it showed 283 Collettsville students purchased war stamps, and 29 purchased bonds, and 11 of the teachers purchased the bonds. Runners-up: Valmead, Whitnall, Hudson, and Granite Falls. That's where I'm saying I don't know whether Lenoir was in a different system or not, and it just wasn't recorded here. All right, back to Lenoir High School. They decided, the Victory Corps decided they were going to have different activities through the weeks. They called them Victory Weeks. Victory, the word victory was very important back then. So they did all this. And they had Jeep clubs. This little club of people would raise money, and this little club of people would raise money. And each club signed up to a week to sponsor. For instance, the first week was I don't remember what that is, but they had a square dance. The second week was distributive DO. What's that kind of class? I don't remember. But the seniors did the third week. Fourth week was the band, so on like that. And then they had a Sadie Hawkins Day. Remember those days? And the High Y. The High Y seemed to be one of the main ones that did things. The High Y Club started the big thing. This was by now April, because the scrapbooks were already sent in, and that ended the end of March. So this was further than that. This was into April and May. They've decided they're going to raise $400,000 in the whole county. That was our quota, because they really needed money for the war. So they put another stamp booth downtown. Freedman's School did amateur and stunt program and 10-cent stamp in order to get in. The citywide amateur program and musical comedy, and they had one where all the men dressed as as the women, and it was hilarious. It was like the stag weddings, what they used to call the weddings. Womanless wedding. I mean, this was a womanless variety show when all the men dressed, and in fact, one of the men was in, he was in the baby carriage, and I've got the picture of it here, but I didn't put it up there because it didn't show very well. So, all right, here it is. This is what started me on this research, because I found this in the newspaper where there's an airplane. The city of Lenoir over Tokyo. The Lenoir High School students in the final drive to raise $300 to purchase a bomber to be christened the city of Lenoir. And as soon as I saw that, I got in touch with Sandra. I said, Lenoir did it too, Lenoir did it too. So the question is though, did they do it? Because this is the fundraiser. This was the advertisement for it, and this was to get everybody interested so they would do their part. You've done your bit, and now do your best. So, they did do this. The city of Lenoir, Lenoir High School, along with Friedman, the two of those went together and pulled their resources together. Central buys 11 Jeeps and a plane by the bond drives. Pursuit ship for the Army Air Force will be christened the city of Lenoir. Now, it says down below that, I read this in one of the newspaper articles. Coach McMillan, the Hawaii sponsor, that's one of the clubs, said his organization had already completed plans for the new school year beginning September 1943 and is determined to sell $300,000 worth of bonds so it may enable the Army to buy a bomber which will bear the name the Spirit of Lenoir. But 2 weeks later in the thing, I saw this little article, insignificant little article in the Lenoir News Topic that said, students await photo of plane they have named. Students anxiously await the Spirit of Lenoir. They sold over $120,000 worth of securities for buying all this. Remember the 11 Jeeps and the Pursuit flyer. It was not the actual bomber. It was the Pursuit flyer, but they got to name it the city of Lenoir, and they were waiting for the picture. And they were waiting for the picture. Well, I started looking for the picture. I kept thinking, well, it's going to be in the newspaper. Well, it wasn't in the newspaper all of 1943. I couldn't find it. I came up here to the museum. I looked through every little scrapbook they had here. Couldn't find it. I thought a lot of your research was done in the school newspaper. You know, remember the school newspapers. They don't have them here except starting in 1947. So I don't know what before then, where they might be in a closet somewhere, but Cindy and I started looking, we couldn't find anything. And okay, so I did find this. Now, that's so small, I'm going to read parts of it to you. The high school, Lenoir High School had 300 and, let me find it here, 300 and, I got it circled, no, 483 graduates of Lenoir High School in the service during World War II. So they sent 483 letters out to the servicemen, no matter where they were, to tell them they were thinking of them and, you know, so on like that. But this article was written by Dot Lampkin in remember how the high schools used to have news columns from each school to tell what's going on in their schools? Well, this was the one that Dot Lampkin did, and she put the actual letter that the students came up with, and I want to read one part to you. The 1st of November, we'll organize for another triple threat Jeep drive. Last year, we were able to accept 7 Jeeps as our quota, but we sold enough in the last 2 months set aside to buy 11 Jeeps and a Pursuit flyer. By the way, if you see a plane flying over there with the Spirit of Lenoir High written on her side, you will know that it is our real Spirit for that is the plane we bought with our stamps and bonds. That's the last I found mentioned about this in 1943. I didn't go into 1944 because I didn't have time and I stopped, but I have challenges for you all. First of all, did Lenoir High School receive this Minuteman flag? They talked about it. Do any of you remember hearing anything about the Minuteman flag? Have you seen anything? We need to find that out. Second thing, where are the scrapbooks that each school made? The winner, Collettsville, it was sent to Raleigh, and then from Raleigh, they took the 100 or how many ever they had, and that toured the state of North Carolina without the main winner that went on to Washington, D.C. But since then, I don't know what happened to those scrapbooks. Where is the picture the students were waiting for? That to me is the most interesting question, is where's this picture? That it says the students were waiting and I never saw it. So, and then finally, if it did happen, what happened to the plane? So, those of you who enjoy research, there's your task. Now I'm going to let Sandra tell the answer to the last question for her group.
Thank you, Gretchen. One thing I'd like to say is one of the reasons, and it doesn't simplify it, but it explains how all of these groups were able to raise the money, is this was an unusual time. Anyone that could work went into the factories. They were working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. I've talked to people who said, I was a little boy, I never saw my father because he worked 12 days a week. People had more money than they'd ever had. Everything was rationed. Gas was rationed. You couldn't drive your cars. If you rode your bikes, people would say, hey, that rubber's needed, turn it in at the rubber drive. So everything was rationed. You couldn't even buy clothes or shoes. You were only allowed one pair of shoes for 6 months or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. But everything was rationed. So people had more money than ever, so they saved it. So it wasn't that difficult, although yes, it was, to get them, instead of to put it in the bank in a savings account, to invest in the country and invest in a savings bond or stamps. It makes it a little bit easier to understand, but still, what these kids in Lenoir did, what the people of Caldwell County did, what the people in Michigan did, what the people all over this country did, was still extraordinary in the amount of support they gave to the war effort. So, remember, we left, the Spirit of South High was taking off and flying off into wild blue yonder, headed to war, headed to save the war, with the wings and the prayers of all these, on the wings and the prayers of all these young children. And nobody ever heard what happened to it. And year after year went by, and when the class of 47, 48, 43, 44, 45, 46, and 47, South High School was a 7th through 12th grade school. Whenever they get together, the big question was, what happened to the bomber? Well, all these mythical stories grew. You know, oh, it was at the movies. You see, remember back then, you had the newspapers, you had the radio, you had posters, and you had the newsreels at the movies. And, you know, the kids had, oh, I just know that was our bomber. I could see some white writing on it as it was going down. And, you know, they had all these mythical stories, but nobody really knew what happened to it. Well, about 40-some years later, in 1990, one of the alumni, who was a historian, decided he was going to find out what happened. And he searched and searched, and the military was going to get back to him, and the time went on and nothing happened. And he got tired of waiting, so he called in the big guy. And the big guy for us at South High School in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was President Gerald R. Ford. He graduated from South High School in 1931. And he was a very, very loyal alumni to the point where he had his football team at the White House Thanksgiving morning for breakfast, something they had done every year since 1930. He had them to breakfast at the White House. And the picture's in the book, but I just have to tell you this. The picture in the book shows all the women in the background in their furs. And I said, I can guarantee you that's the only breakfast those women ever were allowed to attend. But at any rate, he asked President Ford to get on it. Of course, he got the powers that be, and the word came back, just crushed all of these kids who are now in their 30s and 40s and 50s. Because the word came back that it never went to war, it was used for training. Well, that was the first disappointment. And not only was it used for training, it no longer existed because it was scrapped in Columbus, Ohio. So I have this article that says how disappointed these students were that had spent all this money and it never even saw battle. And so now jump to 2012, and it's one of my high school reunions, and I decided I was going to give a program that everybody would listen to, because you know at your reunions nobody listens to what anybody's saying. So I did a history of the school, and it's a very unusual school. It was not a wealthy school, by the way. It was the poorest school in the city of Grand Rapids, and they still accomplished what they accomplished, which was extraordinary. So one of the stories I told was the bomber story, and the bomber story ended with this article that said it was used for training and never saw war, and it was scrapped in Columbus, Ohio. And that was the end of it. That was the end of the story. I went on to tell something else. Well, afterwards I was talking to a group, and my friend Joe Rogers, he overheard me say to a group of people I was talking to about the bomber, I don't know why people were upset. If it was used for training, B-17 bomber has a crew of 10. It has radio operators, bombardiers, pilots. I'm blanking out. What? Engineer. And bombardiers. Okay. So it's got a huge crew, and if it was used for even a year, it literally could have trained hundreds of men, and those hundreds of men certainly had made a major impact on the war. Well, Joe overheard me say that, and he is a former military guy, and he decided he's going to find out how many pilots were trained on our bomber. So now we have the internet. We didn't have the internet in 1990. Can you believe that? We didn't have the internet in 1990. But we have it now. So he said he looked, and it took him quite a while. He never found it. But what he did find was a crash report. And the reason he could find it was, let me see if I don't know if I've got the pointer on here still. Well, you can see the tail numbers on the plane, 229577. Those numbers on the tails of all planes, even today, identify that plane. And we had those numbers, and he just plugged those into the internet. But he said it still took him several days. And up popped this crash report. And it said that our bomber crashed in Meadows of Dan, Virginia. It was like, whoa, Meadows of Dan, Virginia. So he sent for the military report. That's the military report in the middle. He sent me a copy. That's what I did to it with my highlighter. I made all kinds of marks on it. But those of you in the military already know this, but I didn't know this. I hadn't been in the military. But when anything happens, everyone involved had to write their version of what happened. So in this report, not only does it tell what was going on in the plane, but it tells where they bailed, how they felt, what farmers came to their aid, where the plane crashed, all this incredible information. So Joe sends me the report, and now, of course, I live in North Carolina. We moved here about 10 and a half years ago. And one day I said to my husband, I wonder where Meadows of Dan is. And we look on the map, and it's just north of Mount Airy. Well, I'm a writer. That just seemed like the man upstairs was saying, this is yours, do something about it. So I decided to do something about it. So what's the logical thing? I called the Historical Society. You don't call Meadows of Dan, it's a crossroads in the mountains, in the very hilly mountains. To this day, it's still a crossroads. So I call Patrick County Historical Society, and I say to the gentleman, I'd like information about the B-17 bomber that crashed on October 1st, 1944. And there was dead silence. And John, who now is a friend of mine, he says, oh, no, it wasn't October 1st, it was March 24th. It wasn't a B-17, it was a B-24, and 11 crew members were killed. And I'm thinking, you had another bomber crash in your small town? Oh my goodness. I said, no, I'm talking about the one on October 1st. And again, there was silence, and John said, I'm 64 years old, I grew up here, I know nothing of this story, are you sure? And I said, I can tell you the pig lot where the bomber came down, I can tell you the farmer's name, I can tell you the local residents who came to the aid of all of the crew when they bailed. 4 landed in Floyd County in Willis, Virginia, and the other 2 landed within a couple miles of the actual crash site. And so there became this big mystery that has been uncovered because of this story. I couldn't have anticipated anything so incredible. To let you know what the mission was, the bomber was on a mission to go from Columbus, Ohio to Montgomery, Alabama. This was a night mission. These were not new pilots. They were all combat veterans. There were 6 of them. They had all done their sorties over in, most of them out of Europe, out of England into Germany, and the captain had flown the most missions out of North Africa into Germany. So they were all combat veterans. They were training to be commanders of their own ships. Now you may not know, but back then they referred to their airplanes as their ships. So they were training to be commanders of their ships. And this was a night mission, 2.5 hours down, 2.5 hours back, half an hour on the ground to drop off an officer and turn around and go back. Well, on the way down, it started to get a little foggy, but they had to fly around a little bit, and then they were able to land. They were cleared to take off, and they took off, and long about Chattanooga, the fog really rolled in. And way back then, the navigational systems used on the B-17, the high-tech navigational system was the RDF system, the radio directional finder. And that relied heavily on radio signals that were beamed from towers strategically placed at airports across the country. Well, today with our high-tech cell phones and our internet service, if a storm goes over, it screws up our internet service, it screws up our phones, at least it does by us down south of Marion where I live. And so you can imagine way back then the effect of weather on this RDF system. I will tell you that the captain, now think about this, the captain did tell me, think about this, the captain told me that all the airports were closed from Mississippi to the Atlantic because of the heavy fog, and the only choice he had was to fly around until he ran out of gas. Had no idea where he was. They had no idea. They were shocked when they landed and were told they were in Virginia. There was a 6-man crew. All of the men were injured when they parachuted out. They thought that Michael Hoban was the most severely injured because he hit the ground, and he told me that he never saw the ground until he hit it, and so he shattered his leg pretty bad. And this is he as a young man to my left, your left of the picture. That's Michael Hoban as a young man. Here's the captain at 99 years of age. He just passed away, by the way, on February 25th, a couple weeks shy of his 101st birthday. Sharp as a tack, his son, right up until the end. He actually edited the chapter on the crash to make sure that I said it right. I mean, what do I know about flying a plane or what was going on? I had his report, but interpreting it was something, but he went through it and he said I got it right. He only made 1 or 2 changes. He also told me that he said, you know, there were 7 other crashes that night. There were actually 8 stateside military crashes on October 1st, 1944. And he said, my crew is the only one that survived because I made them bail. We all bailed. The other crews all died because they tried to land. Now, when he told me that, his son was there. This was all done on the phone. He lived in Utah. And so his son called me afterwards and he said, you can't tell this, you shouldn't tell this story. And I said, why not? He said, my father's 99 years old. He talks about these stories all the time, and we don't know if they were commercial planes or if there was ever even 7 other planes. And I said, don't worry about it, I can verify this. So I went to that crash report, October 1st, they're all listed, and guess what? I counted 7 other crashes east of the Mississippi. His crash, our bomber, was the only one that, where the crew survived. These are actual pictures from the military report. It landed in Farmer Charlie Bud Goad's pig lot. And one of the first women, understand, the Historical Society didn't know about any of this. So I had to go on the radio in Virginia. I did a radio interview and I wrote to all the newspapers I could think of, and people came out of the woodwork. And the first woman I interviewed on the phone, Ruth Jean Bolt, at the very end she said, and you know, she said, well, my mom brought me over there. She said, there were those little baby pigs running everywhere, and you know, not one pig was injured or killed. And I said, that is going in the book. These are photographs from, you know, the gal Ruth at the very beginning who had the little brownie camera. She came up to me when I did a presentation in Floyd County, and she said, I took pictures of that crash with my brownie camera. And these are from her personal collection. Now, the other strange thing that happened was now we have a crash that nobody remembered, nobody knew about in this tiny, tiny mountain town. And it happens that Farmer Bud Goad's property, guess what? Right next to Mabry's Mill, the most photographed spot on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So I'm talking to his grandson who grew up there and wasn't there the night the bomber crashed. He was over the mountain staying with his parents, but he lived with his grandparents. And anyways, he said, well, you know, my grandpa sold his property to the National Park System a couple years after the war. And up until just before the war started, the Blue Ridge Parkway was in the process of being built, and it had come as far as Mabry's Mill. And when the war started, all the money was diverted to the war effort, so all construction stopped. Well, his grandpa sold the property to the Blue Ridge, to the National Park System for the Blue Ridge Parkway. See, I was going to call this book The Untold Story of a Michigan High School, a B-17 bomber, and the Blue Ridge Mountains. But come on, I'm no fool. Now we have a bomber that crashed on the Blue Ridge Parkway on National Park property. So a friend of mine said, you got to call the National Park people and talk to their historians. So I called them, and guess what? They said, what crash? They knew nothing about it. Well, they weren't going to take my word for it. So on July 2nd, 2015, they went with their archaeologist with their GPS and the deed to Farmer Goad's property that they had, and they walked the property, and yes, indeedy, it was National Park property. There are many, many stories that I was told about I mean, I could talk for hours about this because people keep telling me stories they're just so incredible. And one of the stories that was told over and over was that the young boys went in and took parts of the bomber and made rings out of it. And everyone I interviewed who told me that, do you have a ring? Do you have a ring? Nobody has a ring. I used to have one. I don't know where it is. And so, again, on October 1st, 2015, the 71st anniversary of the crash, I did my book signing in Meadows of Dan. And afterwards, a gentleman came up to me and he said, "This belongs to you." And he gave me this ring that he said was made out of something from the instrument panel of our bomber. You're welcome to come up and see it afterwards. I was surprised that it is very finely tooled, but I was reminded that even though the people in this small mountain town were probably considered hill people, they made everything. They made their pots and pans, they made their hinges, they made all their tools. So I was told, well, young boys knew how to tool things. And so this is not surprising. And when you look at it, my husband and most men who look at it think that it was probably a six-sided nut and it was ground down that way. It was made by Coy Hall. The three Hall brothers were milking cows at 4:50 a.m. on October 1st, that Sunday morning when the bomber crashed. And they heard it, and the older boys went running to the site. This was donated to me by a man, Lavoy Bray, and this will go to the Patrick County Historical Society, who, by the way, are putting together a display of this bomber that they didn't know happened. And John, my contact, said that this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to them that he knows of. Well, I couldn't just let things go. I had to find out, how do you get a historical marker? And I was told that the superintendent makes that decision. So in May of 2016, I sent a letter to the new superintendent reminding him that it's the 100th anniversary of the National Park System, and what better way to celebrate it than a new discovery on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And in August, I received a letter that they're going to place a historical marker. Last October, they came and chose a site. They will not put it in the actual crash site because there's still a lot of pieces there and they don't want people in there. Let me see if I've got this. It's not working. Okay. You see, I can't get up there. At the top of the screen, you see a road coming straight down. That's the Blue Ridge Parkway. At the top of the screen, you see that black thing. That's the mill. If you come forward, you see kind of a half circle. That's the restaurant at the mill. The bomber circled the mill twice and landed in the field right behind the restaurant. That's right next to what is now that big open space is employee parking lot, and the other space is bus tour parking lot. So it is right there, right on their property. We've been gone for 5 days, so it's been about a week and a half ago, I finally was told that the marker was approved, it's been through compliance, and now it's going to the design center. And I believe it's going to be a storyboard, because they'll do it to match what's already at Mabry's Mill. And it's going to be placed, I don't know exactly where it's going to be placed, but I'm guessing between the mill and the restaurant. There's a walk there, and if you've been there, there are other storyboards along there giving bits and pieces of this story. So you can say you heard it first before they had a marker. One of the things that Gretchen and I live for, especially when you write nonfiction, is your primary sources. You know, the people who've lived it, newspaper articles, magazine articles, things like that. But primarily, I guess that would be a secondary source, but the primary source are the people. And I was fortunate that Arthur Blackport, that is he today, right above there. He is still with us, and is excited about being at the dedication of the marker whenever that happens. David Dutcher just passed away on February 26th. He was quite ill. In the middle is with the gentleman with the hat, John Reynolds. He is the Secretary of the Patrick County Historical Society, and he's a good friend. Vera is a woman who I interviewed who absolutely insisted we had to come to her farm so she could show us the porch where her father stood and called out into the fog because he heard somebody yelling, and he saved Captain Stredbeck, the captain of the bomber. And so she insisted that we had to come to her house to see that. And of course, Major Arvil Stredbeck, who was Captain Stredbeck at the time, he was the captain, and I already told you that he's 99 there. He's wearing a bomber shirt. I usually wear it when I speak, but I decided not to today. I had the pleasure of meeting Michael Hoban, who just turned 101 on June 10th. He's still alive and doing well. He's in Bradenton, Florida. He's the only one that I was able to meet. The two gentlemen in the middle, both named Arlie. The gentleman in the blue shirt is the grandson who told me about his grandpa selling the property to the Blue Ridge Parkway. And Arlie Burnett, the other gentleman in the hat, he lived about a mile away and said he was 11 years old and he came running. And then, of course, Joe Rogers, who he says I started it all, and I say, no, you started it, you found the report. So we have this running joke, and I'm just about done. I was very, very fortunate that Dave Dutcher was not only the chairman, but he was he was a saver. And not only was he a saver, his mother was a saver. And he saved all of his high school newsletters. And he became a very successful lawyer. And for, I believe it was his 40th high school reunion, which would have been a couple hundred kids, by the way, he spiral bound all of those newsletters and gave them out. So it was really interesting. When I called, Arthur Blackport was the first one I called. He was the instigator of the whole thing. And I said, so Arthur, they made you a co-chairman because there were 4 co-chairmen. They kept the 8th graders as co-chairman. So what was your job? What did you do? And he said, well, I think I bought a couple stamps. And I'm on the phone. It was like, I can't write a book about this. And then I called Dave Dutcher, and he said, I've got just the thing you need. And he sent me a copy. And those came out every other week, and it went week to week to week to week, and told the story of how they did this. By the way, everything Gretchen talked about that was going on here was also still going on at the school. All the individual clubs had their own other drives. They were collecting metal, and I had to tell the varsity club members that the reason there are no more sports trophies from the 40s was the principal and the coach decided to make an example of sacrificing for the medal drive, and they gave all the sports trophies to the medal drive. There are just so many stories. Anyway, so I wrote this book to be able to tell the class of 1943, 44, 45, 46, and 47 what happened to their bomber. Never expected all this other stuff that has just mushroomed from it. And but I was happy to be able to tell them they should be proud that they bought a training bomber. By the way, one of the gentlemen who I read in his obituary, one of the first lieutenants who was a pilot, became a high-ranking colonel, and he helped develop the release system for the atom bomb. So talk about affecting the war. I was able to tell them you bought a B-17 trainer bomber. They raised well over $375,000. You don't stop a campaign like this. The money kept rolling in. And today that would be equivalent to $5,309,718.21. It's just even hard to even imagine. And You know, people ask me, do you think that would happen today? And well, first of all, I hope we never have to have a war to make something like that happen today. But in my very simplistic understanding of financial things, I would think if the government offered a higher percentage than the banks, people might buy savings bonds. Wouldn't we all? It's an investment. So, at any rate, so that's a story, and it's a true story. I'm very proud to have been able to bring it to you, and Gretchen added a wonderful, you just have to come with me everywhere and do your part to...
And my part's not finished. Y'all just have to take that over, right?
There you go.
I think everybody should be required to read through, sit in the library and read the microfiche newspaper 1942, 1943, just to appreciate this greatest generation. That's what I did, and it blew me away because at the same time that all this was going on, there was also the campaign for polio, to eradicate polio. So that was being taken care of too. So it wasn't just this.
And we do have some old newspapers here in our archive.
Of the newspaper. But we couldn't find the school newspapers for that period of time. If anybody knows where they are, that would be wonderful.
By the way, I will tell you, when Gretchen said that, the article said they were waiting for a photograph, this is, well, some people say, well, that's government for you. They couldn't continue to fly the planes into hometowns. In fact, it is believed that our high school is one of the only ones where that was actually happened. And so what the government would do was they would take their artists, they would do a rendition on the side of a plane, take a photograph, take a photograph and send the photograph in, and there was never really a bomber. There's a list of over 229 bombers, groups in the back of the book, and since the book came out, we've been able to identify 4 more cities that actually took part in the campaign and actually got bombers too. So we're happy to add to the list.
And Bobby brought a letter from a naval, because there was what was the name of it? City of Lenoir.
The USS Lenoir.
USS Lenoir that took part in the naval.
Was that a
World
ship?
War II.
Was
It
that a
was
ship? Because you could buy ships too.
Yeah.
You could buy ships, you could buy, you name it, any piece of equipment you could buy. You could.
Any questions?
At any rate,
There's refreshments and everything, so we can talk over that as we go. And Sandra has books for sale. How much were they?
well, I have a discounted version for $10 that has a couple of errors in it, and then I have a revised edition for $13. So either way.
Okay.
We also, they will be around for a while, and we want to, would you please have cookies? We have lots of cookies, and we bake and bake and bake, and so y'all just enjoy them. We have 6 books we'd like to give away. We have a surplus of some books that we sell here at the museum all the time, and so if you already have a copy, take it and give it to someone else. So our first number will be 9. Oh, they're numbers, okay. Van Griffith.
Oh,
Woo! Van. So Barbara showed me where those books are. There are 3. There's either the Ellen John Hopkins or the Annals of Caldwell County or the Methodist book. And the Methodist book actually has lots of Caldwell County little history in it. Okay, go ahead while Van signs. We have John W.I.L.E. Once you go to you can go and choose. All right, our next lucky person is Richard Garland. I'm sorry, and we have a celebrity here tonight named James Taylor. James Taylor, sing us a song. I love it. Yeah, you may pick your own, whichever one you would like out of those. Our next person is Roger Warren. Roger Warren. All right.
That's her husband, our husband's right.
And Diane, if there's, if they would rather have the General John Perkins or the annals, we can pull them out for you.
Let me go get something more for you.
We've got.
You've drawn all nails.
Ladies, what are y'all? Y'all just want to have crush. Let's see, I'll draw. Give me about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got one more to draw. Next time we'll see if Cindy will let us give away some of the Caldwell County DVDs. Steve Branch. Steve, she's pulling some more animals and not Perkins. Right there, yeah, Steve Branch is our last one. Yes, Judge Bill would like to say a word.
On behalf of the museum, and Bobby is on the board, Myra's on the board, Danny's on the board. There are 4 board members of the museum here tonight. We are so glad you came here to have your meeting. We invite you to come back again, and especially for a meeting, a program as good as this one. Thank you all very much.
And if I could say 2 things. Number one, if you know of any other groups that Gretchen and I could come talk to, we'd love to do that. And number 2, if there are 2 military men who would like to do a military fold on the Minuteman flag, that would be an honor. If there are 2 of you in the audience.
To do the military fold.
Thank you.
Anybody here know how to do that?
You know how to fold a flag.
I'll help you. I think I know it. You probably know better than I. They say the field of stars would be. That's not relevant. You're going to get right here.
I'll start at the end.
Okay.
On the outside.
Right.
Everybody make sure to get some refreshments.
Isn't that a fun story?
Oh, it's actually the librarian. So I've been here since 2004. And so when I get here, I bring it back. And every week.
An excellent presentation by Sandra and Gretchen. Please come see us at the Lenoir and Caldwell County History Site and also at our Caldwell Heritage Museum, 112 Vaden Street, Lenoir, North Carolina, 28645.